Hey guys, this is Paul Salvette out in Bangkok, Thailand. I'm the managing director of BB eBooks. Today we're going to take a look at cascading style sheets, cascading style sheets for your ebook. So hopefully you've taken a look at our HTML tutorial, or if you already know HTML, great. Let's take a look at how to kind of add presentation and style to the different content in our book to make it, more professional looking. Okay. So right now, I've got a basic HTML document. It contains a bunch of Ron Swanson quotes from Parks and Recreation. Now, I've got it saved here. I'm going to open up um, my web browser and open the file. Okay. Okay, so I've got like a H1 element here, an H2 element here, and all these other things are just paragraph elements. Great, the content's all there. The content's all there, but it doesn't look very jazzy or exciting or anything. And the typography is, not very pleasing to the eye. So what we want to do, we want to use cascading style sheets to kind of apply some presentation to this. Now, how do we do that? First thing you want to do is create a file with a .css extension. So I'm just going to create a blank file. I'm going to call it, I don't know, style sheet.css. Make sure you save it as a .css extension, okay? And now to tell the HTML document that, hey, use this style sheet, you've got to put in what's called a link element inside the head section somewhere. So here's our head section up here. I'm going to put it right down here. And what this does is it says, okay, this is a type, the type attribute just indicates the CSS file, and hypertext reference to style sheet.css. Note the closing little guy here. It's a self-closing element. Okay, so now my HTML document knows it has to look for stylesheet.css in the same directory that the HTML file is in to use those styles. Okay, so I just opened up my stylesheet.css. For CSS files, you don't have to have anything like a template, a crazy, declaration at the beginning or anything. You can just start going to town. So each declaration is comprised of three parts. There's the selector, which let's do P. So in this case, P would reference any P element inside the HTML. And then you make a bunch of property and value declarations inside these little closing braces. You don't have to put it on a new line like this. You can do it like this if you want, but I just prefer to do it like this. Okay, so in between the braces, the web browser, the e-reading device will recognize, okay, for every P, I got to do some stuff to style the HTML that's inside here. All right, let's look at some basic, styling elements. Now, there is a lot. CSS is a really extensive language. You can do all sorts of stuff with it, but we're just going to look at the most basic stuff. So one thing we want to do, say we want to make the text a little bit bigger and a little bit bolder. Let's make it bold. Alright, so there's a declaration called font weight and then bold. Alright, the font weight is called the property, and bold is called the value. By default, paragraph elements are font weight normal, but we're going to make it font weight bold. So let's save that and then pull back up our HTML and see how that looks. What you see happened is it took every paragraph element and it makes it bold. Okay? That's great, but that's probably not what we want. That's probably not what we want. So let's take this out for right now, and we're just going to make a few words bold. Now, how do you tell the HTML file to make just like a couple words bold? Well, what you need to do is specify using an inline tag like span, and then we're going to declare a class, and we're going to call the class bold text. Okay? Now, And then the span element's going to cover just these two words right here like that. Okay? So the span element is wrapped around calibrated recipe, and it has a class of bold text. Now, the class by itself doesn't do anything, but what it does is, for your style sheet, you can reference those classes from your style sheet. And to do that, you do span, the name of the element, it's a span element, and then dot, like a little period there, and then the name of the class, which was bold text. So our selector is span.boldText. That is, any span element with a class equal to bold text, do some stuff in here. And we're going to make it font weight bold. Okay, let's see how that looks. Okay, you'll see the style sheet is telling what's in the span element to make that bold. You can kind of see that there. Okay, now let's try wrapping some span elements around other text to do other stylistic things with it. Say we wanted this one to be like underlined. I'm just going to call it underlined text. You can call the class whatever you want. And then I'm going to close that off there. And then maybe I want some italics on capitalism. So span class equals italic text. Okay. Okay. So now we go back to our style sheet and we make some more declarations here. So span dot underline text, and underline, it's a property, it's called text decoration, and then underline. Now whenever you make a declaration, make sure you close it off with the semicolon there, and make sure it's always in between the little braces. Okay. Okay, and then italic text, and this one, it's actually called font style italic. Not italics, it's italic. Okay, so we'll load back this up, we'll see how it looks. Okay, you can see categories got underlined here, and capitalism has been italicized. Now, what is the benefit of doing this? Why can't you just go in the HTML and, you know, add, you know, tell inside the HTML that, hey, make this word underline, hey, make this word bold? Because the reason is, if you want to change the stylistic appearance of a bunch of things at once, you just need to change it in your style sheet, not going through every single word that you wanted to underline and changing it. You know what I'm saying? You can just, you know, use style sheets to kind of change everything at once with just like a couple lines of code. It's really important to do that for eBooks. Now another thing, one thing we want to do, you'll notice that, you know, it's like left aligned. Like some people like left aligned text, but I want like a justified alignment. So justified meaning it lines up perfectly on the left and perfectly on the right. To do that, for our P element, we use a property called text align, and then with the value of justify. And what that'll do is that'll tell everything here. See how it's all justified now? That's pretty good, huh? You can do the 4 different values you can have for text align is left, right, center, and justify. Now, say for this first one, by Ron Swanson, we wanted this to be centered. All right, I'm going to make a class. I'm going to call it centered. Remember, you can call the classes whatever you want. Okay, so class centered. Now I'm going to make an argument here, p centered, and then text align center. Okay, now let's see how that looks. Okay, see, it's centered the Byron Swanson there. That's pretty nice. Now you might think, well, hey, you told the paragraph element up here to justify, but like you told the paragraph element here to center. Well, it kind of gets into what's called the specificity hierarchy, and since the style sheet is telling it to any p element with a class of centered to do this. It'll override this one because this one isn't as specific, because this just says, hey, any paragraph element. But this one's more specific, saying, hey, any paragraph element with a class of centered, do this. Text align center. Okay, not all paragraphs are the same inside an ebook. Say we wanted one of these paragraphs down here to be a little bit bigger than the other ones. You had me at Meat Tornado. We're going to make that, we're going to call that big para. So we're going to give it a class of big para. Now, what we can do here is add another declaration and make that big. To make text bigger, use what's called font size. Font size. And I'm going to do what's called 1.2 ems. Okay, what the hell is an em, right? 1.0 em is proportional to what the reader's font size preference is on their device. So it's called a relative measurement. Yeah, sometimes you might see stuff like, 20 pixels or something. But I recommend just using ems, because that way it won't force a certain, it won't force something on the reader. It scales proportionally based on their preferences. It's a good practice in ebooks to use ems for font sizes. Okay? So let's take a look at that. Okay, look, you had me at Meat Tornado. It's a 1.2 em, which is, so it's about 120% the size of the standard font size here, if that makes sense. Okay. Next up, why don't we take a look at text indentation? Now, most books, right, they have the first line of the paragraph always has a little indent. Almost always for fiction, and most of the time, but not always for nonfiction. Nonfiction, you have what's called block paragraphs, where there's like a margin of space in between each paragraph. But for fiction, you almost always have the first line indent. To set the first line indent, you use a property called text indent, and then you can also use an em. A lot of people like to use like 1.5 ems, 1.25 ems. It's up to you. So let's see what that does. Okay, so as you can see here, every paragraph element gets like a little bit of space on that first time. That's why it's very important you don't put spaces before paragraphs. Like, a lot of people still think, ebooks work like a typewriter, but you want to use your style sheets to kind of distinguish everything. Don't use actual spaces. Now, if you look at the reflowability, no matter how many lines there is, it'll just be that first line will have that indent. One thing you have to be careful about with your style sheets is, since we applied the text indent property to every paragraph element, even ones that we want centered will have that first line indentation, which is not what you want, because this is actually, it's hard to tell, but it's actually slightly off center. So going back here, all you need to do is set your text indent. Just set it to 0. Okay, and what that'll do is that'll make it perfectly line in the center, because it won't have that indentation on the front. Now, going back, looking at the white space, typically on books you don't see like a first line indent and white space in between the paragraphs. It kind of looks pretty amateurish. So what we want to do is we want to play with our margins. Now, the margin is the white space that surrounds each and every element. It's best to think about elements, block elements like paragraphs, H2, H1 as kind of boxes stacked on top of each other. So this is actually, think about this like a box. And to adjust the spacing in between the box and the white space, you can play with what's called margins. So what we can do is, for P, we can do margin 0. And that will delete all white space in between the paragraphs. So let's take a look at how that looks. Okay, you'll see that the white space is just it's pretty much gone. Now, say we haven't talked about the left and the right white space. Say we wanted to set that off. Now, the way the margin property works is you can enter 1, 2, or 4 values. If you enter 4 values, it goes top, right, bottom, left. So if I did 0, that would be the top margin. Then 2.0 ems, that would be the right margin. 0 would be the bottom margin, and then 2.0 ems on the left margin. Just remember the acronym TROUBLE, TRBL. So let's see how that looks here. Okay, what we've done is we've added left and a right margin of 2.0 ems. To simplify this, we can just write 0 and 2. We just write 2 values. And the way this gets parsed is the first property is the top and bottom, and the second property is the left and right. Okay? It's just kind of like a shorthand way. Okay? See, nothing got changed. Now, okay, going back to this. Now, for this paragraph right here, we probably want some white space in between Ron's name and his first quote. So to do that, we can go to the p-centered and add some margin bottom space there. And you can either add it like this. So we'll add a little bit of margin bottom space. So top will be 0, right will be 0, bottom will be, let's say, 1.5 ems, and right, or excuse me, left will be 0. Okay? Let's see how that looks. So what we've done is we've pushed 1.5 ems of white space, margin space, in between this paragraph and that paragraph. Okay, so we've kind of got it sort of laid out here, but now we want to style our H1 and H2 element to, let's say, to be underlined. But you know, I'm kind of like a lazy dude. I don't want to make a declaration for H1 and a declaration for H2. What you can do is, if you do H1 and then comma H2, the way this will get parsed, it'll say, okay, do this stuff in between the braces for H1 and for H2. And you can have as many commas. You could style, you know, all the headings if you want, like that. Okay, and I'm going to make those underline, and we'll see how that looks. Even if you, for your CSS, even if you, like, we don't have an H6 element in our HTML, but there's no harm in putting that in there like that. Okay, let's see how that looks. Okay, there we go. As you can see, it got underlined. And let's say we want it to be centered, so we could just do text align center. Okay. And we'll see how that looks. Oh, that's good. That's good. We could even do it, put it on the right too if you want. If you want to get real fancy, maybe do some kind of artistic thing there. Okay, and that is basically the bare bones basic stuff you need for eBooks on CSS. Now keep in mind, e-reading devices, they're not as, you know, they can't handle as much complex CSS as like a web browser, so you got to keep it kind of simple. One thing you always want to do to check is to check out your CSS, make sure it doesn't have any errors, because we all make errors. An easy way to do that is you go to a website called the Jigsaw Validator. It's also, like the HTML validator, it's run by the good folks at the World Wide Web Consortium. Okay, it's just jigsaw w3.org/css-validator. And so you go by direct input and you just kind of cut and paste your stuff there, and we'll see how we get. Okay, great, no errors found. A real common error is to forget to put in a little braces. So when you do that, bad things happen and you get errors. So that is a basic look at CSS. Now let's take a look at, you know, putting together an actual ebook.